Hey folks, for those of you who are interested in Blender, I just want to show you a little bit about it here, some of the basics. So, I have my start screen here. You can do 2D animation, sculpting, VFX, video editing, all sorts of stuff. And you have your recent files here. I want to do a 3D file, so I will hit General. We have a screen here where we have our camera. You might have a box here. If you do, you can select it by left-clicking it and hit X and then delete. So if you see the box, it would be something like this. You'd see cube, you'd select it, hit X, and then delete. So I'm starting off with a fresh canvas here. So we can add objects up here. Let's start with something basic. We will do a UV sphere. And I'm rotating my middle mouse scroll wheel to zoom in and out. You can see kind of how it looks here. Now, there's two main modes you'll work in Blender. If you hit Tab or go up here and go to Edit Mode, you'll see the object or parts of the object. So right now I'm seeing the reason this looks a little bit blocky is because it's made out of these polygons and vertices are these points. So one thing I can do right off the bat, if I go back to Object Mode, I use Tab key to do that, but you can do it up here too, or Tab. I will tell it I want this object that's currently selected to be set to shade smooth. Now that doesn't change the actual polygons, as you can see here. It just makes it appear smooth as opposed to flat faces. So it looks a little smooth. Let's experiment with what we can do. If we're in object mode and we hit G, we can grab it. If you want to grab it precisely on an axis, you can see Z is up and down, Y is left to right, and X is forward and back. So if I hit G and then Z, it will only move on a vertical axis. If I hit G then Y, it only moves side to side, and then G and X, it's going to move this way. Now we can use that with most commands on here. So this time let's hit S for scale. So scale will change the size overall. If I hit SZ, it will only scale it vertically by moving the mouse, and then you click when you're done. Or SX here, we're going to scale it along X. We also have rotations, but right now you're not going to see much change of rotation if I did it around the Z-axis. So if I hit RZ, you'll see it rotate this way around Z. But if I were to hit RY, I'll hit Control Z, or Command Z if you're a Mac to undo that. Now RY will rotate around the Y-axis, so we'll see quite a bit of a change there. Now hitting Tab again or going up here to edit, either way, we can start messing with the individual polygons. So up here I can choose what I'm affecting, individual points, edges, or faces. So if I choose a point, I can hit G to grab it or rotate or any of the other commands I know. I can also hit Y, to only move on Y-axis or any of the other axes we're used to. Up here, I can choose stuff around it. So proportional editing has a fall off, as we call it. So what that means is when I choose a point, it will gradually fall off the further it gets from what I have selected. And there's different ways to set that. So smooth, I'll go ahead and turn that on. You'll notice the shortcut is O. Now if I hit grab, it shows me a radius of change there inside that circle. Now if I roll down my middle mouse wheel, I change that radius, so it affects more or less of it. Now if you don't like that fall off, you can change it a little bit here. We can have it be more like a sphere. You can have it be sharp, so let's see what sharp is like. We'll hit grab. It's a lot sharper, even when I roll that down. Usually smooth is useful. I use that one quite a bit. So if you hold down the middle mouse button, press it in and keep holding it, and move the mouse side to side, you can actually rotate around stuff in 3D. Conversely, if you have a numeric keypad, you'll notice that the 1 through 9 keys, 8 and 2, are above each other, kind of like an up and down on a directional pad. So if I hit 8, it's going to rotate around it to the top. If I hit 2, it will rotate through towards the bottom. If I hit 4, it will rotate to the left, and 6 to the right, so it forms kind of a cross there. Now if I hit 1, that will take me to front view, orthographic. And what orthographic means is it is straight on at the object. It's not in perspective. So if I hit 5, it's kind of hard to see here, but you're going to get perspective. 7 is from the top, 9 from the bottom, and 3 from the right. So here's why orthographic or a straight-on view is so important. Let's say if I go back to object mode with tab, I'll hit X to delete this. Let's make a new object. We'll do a plane, or let's do a cube. Now say I want to cut part of this off. I'm going to turn on something here called X-ray, and what it does is it will cut through both the front that I can see and the other side over here I can't see. So I'll hit 1, and then let's do K. Oops, I'm going to hit tab to go to edit mode. Then I'll hit K. So I'm going to click some points and hit enter. Now, if I want it to cut exactly all the way through straight, it pays for me to have this straight on. Let's go to this view here. Doesn't want to cut straight through, but that's okay. I have to hit enter. I'm going to undo that. Let's try a different example here. For a good example of how this might work, say we want something to be completely symmetrical in the front and in the back. So, since I'm in edit mode, I can hit Control R. It's going to give me this thing that shows do I want horizontal or vertical. First I choose that. Once I choose it, then I click once I mean to choose it, then I can go up or down to wherever I want it, and then I click. So in this case, we can see it's gone all the way through. I'll hit 1 again to get to the front. If I wanted to mess with some of these points, I'm going to hit Control R a few more times. Now Control R is something we call a loop cut. It cuts all the way around. Alright, now if I wanted to delete these points up here, I want to delete them both the front and the back. So I'll hit B for border select, which just gives us a selection box. First, let's do Alt A. So hitting A selects everything. Alt A will deselect everything. So I don't want to have anything selected, so I hit Alt A. Now I'll hit B and draw a little border. Now usually if I didn't have X-ray on, it would only delete the point in the front that I can see. But because I have X-ray on, I'm looking directly at the front and selected both the one in the front and the back at the same time. With that border, it will delete both. Now notice we have a hole or an opening here. If I were to put this in this mode here, these are view modes, so we can see it in different ways. I have kind of a hole here now, and you don't want that. So here's a good chance to select edge mode. I'm going to select this edge, this whole edge here, and I'll hold shift to add to the selection, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, all while holding shift, and I will hit F. Now what it has done is filled it with a face, but here's a problem. There's no line or no edge here, so it's a face that can't really exist. It's supposed to be one flat face, but it's a 90-degree angle. So there's things we can do to fix problems with meshes too. I'm going to go to Mesh, while that's selected, Clean Up, And I'll tell it anything that's non-planar or non-planar or non-flat, I want it to split it. So notice it made an edge for me right there. So I can select points, edges, or faces. So faces are handy if you want to select a whole face. Let's see. Now notice it's selecting stuff on the other side, even though I'm facing this side, I got something on the back side. That's because X-ray is turned on. So I'll turn that off. I just want to select what's right in front of me and not accidentally get the far side. Okay, so you can do tons of stuff with these. I'm going to go back to object mode with tab, or you could go up here to object mode. Alright, so now I'm looking at it as an object again, not just points or things that make it up here. So we can go ahead and do some certain things to this. We have object options here for transforming it, mirroring it, parenting, which we'll talk about later. If you want one object to follow another, like say the fingers to follow the hand they're attached to, you parent it. So it's a hierarchy, a hierarchical system of objects that cascade down to objects below them, like the trunk of your body or your chest would be the parent of your upper arm, which is the parent of your forearm, which is the parent of your hand, which is the parent of your fingers, because they all have a hierarchical relationship. We could do constraints, track, etc. We'll talk more about this stuff later. We can do some conversions here. These would be handy if you were to bring in like stuff from Adobe Illustrator that was just curves. You can convert it to an actual mesh, like a 3D object, and vice versa. Talk about that later. Alright, now that's object stuff. Let's go back. I'll hit tab again, back to seeing the vertices and the faces here. I'll hit A, just like the whole object. And let's try doing something called a subdivide. So I will hit spacebar. And in here, now you might not see search bar when you hit spacebar, and the reason being because the first time you start Blender, it asks you about some things for the startup file. So I'll show you how to change that. I like to have search bring up, or spacebar bring up search. So I'll go to edit, because I'm on a PC, for preferences. Now if you're on a Mac, you would just go up to where it says Blender and the name up here, and you would find preferences there. We'll click preferences, and in my case, I want to tell it, oh, quick note, if you don't have a 3-button mouse, you can emulate it. There's some information on the internet about that. I like having an actual 3-button mouse. But let's look at our interface. So we have some options here for the interface. Themes, viewport, lights, editing, animation add-ons. Now input, let's see, navigation. Okay, here in key map, notice spacebar actions. I put mine to search because I want to bring up a search where I can type stuff into it. It will help me find things. And once I do that, I like to save those preferences because if you just change it here, it's only good for the session. I want to have it always be like that, so I'm going to save preferences. We'll exit out of that. Okay, now when I hit spacebar, what I want to do is something called subdivide. So I'll start typing in subdivide. And there's a whole bunch here. I just want mesh. So notice it broke this apart into smaller pieces. Now when we're talking about very complex objects, the smaller the pieces are, the more realistic it usually looks. And you've probably heard game developers talk about polygon counts for games. So the more polygons there are, the better the model is, but that's the more processing the computer has to do. So game engines like Unity and stuff, they're always looking for lower polygon counts, or you might have heard of low poly high-res models. They want low polygon counts, but they want it to look high resolution. So I've subdivided it once. I will hit spacebar. I will subdivide it again. And I'm getting a lot more pieces here. Now the amount it breaks it into is kind of based on the size. So this was one big face here, so it broke it 4 times, but notice in these smaller spaces it also broke it 4 times. So because it was already a smaller face, it's going to look a lot smaller here. But that's okay. There's a lot of ways you'll learn later that you can combine these and whatnot. So I'm going to press in my middle mouse wheel again and hold it, and then start moving the mouse to rotate around it. This is what my object looks like now. Now if I hit Alt-A again, I would deselect everything. I could start grabbing points and grabbing them or rotating them. So I'll hit grab Y to pull it down on Y. Remember, you have this proportional option too. So I hit grab again. This time I'm rolling my mouse wheel out to affect a lot more of it. And I'm pressing the button again to rotate around. You can see how it kind of affected it there. Click this. Once again, my proportional editing is pretty large at this point. Now what you want to watch out for is faces that are impacted, like faces that have gone through other faces. So we'll learn some strategies if we have enough time to smesh to avoid that. But I have a kind of weird shape here, so let's see what it looks like. My preview mode right now is set to just see solid objects, but I could actually put it to different forms here, viewport shading, or this one here, it actually gives us a rendered view, and that's in that Eevee rendering engine we're talking about. Now we don't have any ground plane, we don't have any lights, we don't really have anything else, so we're not going to see much. I'll hit tab to go back to object mode. We don't have a material on this yet, so we talked a little bit about materials. So I will click this red guy right here, add a material with a plus, and so that's what we call like a data block. Kind of sets aside material, but we don't really have much assigned to it yet. So you have to create that first, and then in that data block create a new material. So we have this principled BSD, which I recommend you use. We can change the base color by clicking it once and moving it lighter or darker here, and then color on here. Subsurface is kind of like when light goes under a semi-transparent surface and bounces around. What this is mostly used for is skin. That's pretty complicated, so I'm not going to go into it too much right now. Metallic we talked about before. This is going to give it shine and show objects around it. So if you put metallic up high, it's going to be like a chrome reflection. However, if you increase roughness, it's going to be rougher. So what I mean, if I put another object here, let's put a cylinder. I'll hit G to grab that. I'm going to give it the same material, or one like it at least, and we're going to give it a blue color, and we're going to turn the metallic up a lot. Now we don't have any light, so let's add some. We can use objects that we put the emission shader in we talked about. Let's try that real quick. We'll say add mesh. Let's do a cube. Now I want to scale this cube and make it really flat, so I'll hit S, Y to scale it just on the y-axis. Okay, I'm going to do that again, SY. Then I'll hit G to grab it, and then S to scale the whole thing. I want this to be one big light. Now for its material, once again in the red tab here, I'm going to hit plus to add a new material block and then new material. This one I want to be something called an emission shader. And so emission shaders create light. Now we have the strength. I want it to be a little brighter. Now, while this is selected, I will hit Shift D, and that duplicates it. And I don't have to hit G to move it. Once I duplicate it, it should just move on its own. I'm going to put that over here somewhere. So we have light on both sides. Okay, let's see how we're looking so far. I'll hit Render, Render Image. And remember, my view is different from the camera, so we're looking from the camera view here. If I hit 0, On the numerical pad, it shows me the camera. So I actually want to move this camera a little bit. I'm going to hold in my middle mouse button and rotate till I get the view I want. And then what I'll do is I'll set the camera to this view. So the way to do that is to go to View, Align View, Align Active Camera to View. So now we can see it here. So let's try this again. We'll hit Render, Render Image. Now I want to make sure both these objects, when they're selected, are set to Object, Shade Smooth, and then Object, Shade Smooth. So we can see there's specular highlights, which is that highlight there. We're not seeing a ton of reflection yet, so let's work on that a little bit. Now, part of the reason we might not be seeing reflection is because when you have roughness on a metallic object, so if metallic's turned up all the way, it'll be like a mirror. But if roughness is turned up, it's a rough object. It's kind of like a textured metal. Let's try turning that down a little bit, and also on here. We'll take our roughness down. I'll hit 0 on the numeric pad again. Okay, let's go to Render, Render Image. Okay, now we're seeing specular highlights reflected there. And you can kind of see the objects are being reflected. I need to add more of them though, I think. So this one, I'll click this. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate again. Shift D. I'll make some copies. Now this, I'm going to hit Grab X because I want to push it further away from me. Okay, let's check this again. Our metallic should be all the way up. Our roughness all the way down. Specular is the amount of highlight. Now one of the cool things in this new Eevee engine is that we can turn on bloom. So light sources actually set off this volumetric lighting. And volumetric means sort of the way you can see particles of light in mist or fog or coming down from the clouds. It actually makes light visible. So that's something new in the Eevee engine. Let's turn our radius down a little bit. A little bit of a glow. Alright, I'll try this again. Render image. Okay, now we're starting to get some interesting results. Now light does bounce around, so we don't have a ground plane underneath all of this stuff. Let's try adding one. I'll say add mesh plane. It adds it like this. Now I do want it to be on the ground so it's in the right orientation. I just need it larger. So I'll hit S for scale. Now notice it's cutting the stuff off. So what I need to do is hit G for grab and Z to only move it up or down. I'll probably scale it some more. So I'll hit S and then move it outwards and then click. Okay, I want to put a material on this. So while this ground plane is selected, I'm going to also give this its own material with a base color of, let's say, red. We'll put its metallic up all the way and its roughness down all the way. We can mess with the specular. Alright, let's see what happens. We'll hit render, render image. Still not seeing quite the reflections I want though, so let's mess around with our settings a bit more. Now, for your overall settings, you can click on this camera here. That shows I'm in Eevee. Just for the heck of it, let's go to cycles for a second. Now, cycles is what we call an unbiased render. That means it shoots tons of light beams, like little particles of light, all around and watches where they bounce, and it doesn't pay any particular attention to ones we care about or ones we don't. Now, EV is what we call a biased render. That means it tries to only show light rays that we might care about. So this is a more realistic one, but cycles takes longer. So for final renders, a lot of people use this. Although sometimes you can still replicate good examples just from using EV. Let's try one cycles render. Now, if you are on a slower computer, you probably don't want to hit the render button on this. It might take a while, so just be prepared if you do try it. I'll hit render image. Now these tiles, it's actually figuring out where all these tiny light rays are around. And you're watching it do this in real time. Now I'm working on my laptop right now. It's got a i7 processor, 16 gigs of RAM, I believe, and then an NVIDIA 1650Q video card. So most of the time, if I were doing like a real complete render, I would do it on my tower at home, which has a 2080 RTX and 32 gigs of RAM and AMD 2070X processor. So it's going to go a little faster. I do have a GPU render for my PC tower too, which renders exclusively on the GPU, whereas this one here, you can actually set this to use your video card or RAM and your processor. Kind of depends on what you need or which is faster. Now we can see more reflections here, so because this is a biased render, it's going to be a little bit more physically accurate. Now we get reflections because it's actually mimicking these light particles coming down, hitting here, bouncing off another object with the reflection, etc. So it's truly mimicking how those light particles would bounce. Whereas EV is doing sort of an estimation, a quick estimation. But if the results are what you need, that's fine. It takes a lot less processing power. Now you notice there's lots of what we call noise here, these little particles. It's something called caustics. It's something about the way that light bounces. So one thing that can take a lot longer with rendering is if you dial up sampling, like how many light particles it truly pays attention to per, say, square inch of this. Sampling can drive up your render times quite a bit and be a lot harder on the hardware. Also, there's something called caustics. There's a setting for that in the renderer that can minimize those little dots of light, but it's also very hardware intensive. Another option would be denoising. So NVIDIA specifically has put out their own optics denoiser recently, and that is designed to minimize those, but it's only useful if you have an NVIDIA card. Let's go ahead and shut this down. I'll show you some of those options. So in our render properties, we'll see things like performance here. Now mine's going to auto detect the threads of my CPU. We can put on motion blur if there's motion. You can do simplify if you're doing like a test render. We're not doing hair, so that's not really applicable. Light paths is something to cover another time. For acceleration, we're not using any hair stuff right in our spatial split, so this doesn't really apply right now. Viewport, that's automatic, but you can set it to a proportion of the pixel size if you wanted to do like a test render. Baking we'll cover at another point if we have time. Baking does the calculations for how light bounces, and it saves it as a side file. So you don't have to recalculate a lot of these light paths if you make some changes. Color management, if you know photography, this is kind of how things look as far as color and dynamic range. So what that means is the appearance. Like we could go out and shoot video, like normal video, but we could give it a crisp, colorful look or an old retro, noirish, kind of old, like private investigator feel, etc. Like video can be shot with a bunch of different color management settings. So this is the same here. So we do have a lot of options here about how this can look in the end. Right now, I am using my CPU to compute this, but you could use GPU. And I think in my case, on this particular computer, CPU is probably better. Now supported, sometimes they put in experimental features that can be kind of cool, but they are not necessarily fully functional. So you can enable those if you want. Open shading language. I can't really give you a yes or no on when to use that. It's something you'd have to look up for your particular computer system. It's an open source shading language for doing shaders, and it really depends on your project and your settings and your computer. We'll try turning it on for now. Okay, let's click on this next, our scene. This is where it outputs to. If you're on a Mac, temp is a hidden file. It's hard to find, so I always change that. So if you click this file here, like if you were to do a render, this is where it would set it to. Well, I want documents. I'll hit accept. This is the file format. This will overwrite other ones with the same name. We're sending PNG right now, but you could do JPEG, etc. So these ones are video. Here's the problem with that though. If you do video and it does not make it all the way through the frames you've set, like say you have 1,000 frames, and it makes it to 998 and then crashes, you lose everything you've done so far. So if you left your computer rendering for 3 days, you have lost that whole video. It is recommended for most folks to go ahead and use, say, JPEG. Now those are still images, but if I tell the frame start and frame end, it will do a JPEG of every single one of those frames. It's still image for every frame. Then what I do in the end is I compile those frames into a video. So it's just basically like a manual version of video. So it's up to you on how you want to do that. If you want to take your chance with video and it doesn't crash, you'll be fine. You can use any of these. Or you can do it frame by frame and then just tell it, hey, I want to go from 1 to 250 frames over or if it were an animation, for instance. Okay, we'll skip the rest of this for now. Now we have gravity and stuff if you're doing rigid body effects and physics, which we're not. We're shooting from our camera, right? Our main camera here. We have a world where you could put in a background, do some other stuff here. Volumes are things like mists and stuff that have sort of an area, but they're not a solid object. Ambient occlusion is a big one. What this is soft shadows. Now, turning on ambient occlusion increases your rendering time greatly for the most part. It'll take a lot longer. However, it gives it much more realistic results. Ray, this is the rays of light is projecting down. So let's say we didn't want it to hit the camera or whatever. We can change that here. That's a little bit more complicated. Okay, I talked about sampling a bit. Right now I want it on auto. How many times the light bounces. Volumes, we'll skip for now. Got our plane, our objects. One other thing I mentioned was caustics. So let's see. I'm going to go to clamping and caustics here. Let me go ahead and turn this up to try and minimize some of those little spots of light. Now, there is denoising, as I mentioned, especially for video hardware. So if I wanted to do that, so I just have to find the menu it's in here. Oh, here we go. So it's in this one, View Layer Properties, Denoising. So these settings you'll kind of have to look up for yourself because they're always different depending on what you're using, what video card. But I will turn on denoising. Okay, let's try rendering a frame now. Now it will take a lot longer because of the settings I used in the denoising filter. Now you can see here, even though it rendered, it's now still denoising some of those tiles. So you notice it will render once, but these orange squares around it mean it's still working on that tile even though it's rendered. That would be the denoising process. You'll see right here, denoise 33 tiles, 35. So it'll render like 71 out of 510 tiles for this image, but still be denoising after the fact to stop those little spots of light that are distracting. Now we don't have time to wait for this, but notice these spots have far less of those little annoying dots than it did last time because of the denoising and the higher sampling settings. But it's taking a lot longer, so keep that in mind. Especially on a slower computer, you don't want to like bump up these settings unless you can leave that computer sitting for a couple days to render. I'll go ahead and shut this down. Now what if we wanted to take an object like this and apply something to only part of it? Well, let's take a look at how to do that. I'm going to put this back to this mode here. Let's even go here. I'll hit Tab to go to Edit Mode. Now in Edit Mode, I could choose a couple of these faces, for instance, and I'll hold Shift to add to the selection. So I put it on Face Mode, and then I clicked one, and then held Shift to click some others. I'm going to click on this thing, let's see, right here with the green dots that say Object Data Properties. It looks like points, and that's what I want, points. We can make groups of vertices, which is these little dots that make up the object. So I'll go ahead and click Add while those are selected, and I will assign those to this group. So these are selected, I hit plus to make a new group. I will assign the currently selected ones to this group with that button. I'll double click this and name it, let's say window. Or no, let's do light. Now notice if I hit deselect and now I have this selected and I hit select, it's going to reselect those because this is a group of vertices on that object. So a cool thing I can do with that is I can use these vertices to put a material just on that part of the object. I'm going to actually make this an emission, a light one. Okay, let's see what happens if we hit render image. Let's just render a region. So what that means is we're going to tell it to render just an area here. Okay, I said the render region. Let's see if it uses just that. It should. Okay, that's letting me know I did something wrong here because I should see those areas. Like with the light, so let's select those again. Okay, I didn't hit assign, I think. Let's try that. So we're going to assign it to should be able to assign it just to that vertex group. Okay, that looks more like what it was supposed to look like. So let's try this. Okay, there we go. So you have to set the vertex group too. I just forgot to hit assign on the material. Okay, so those are some things to get you started as far as Blender. I'll be posting more online lessons, so that will get you started with a few materials, lights, rendering options, how to apply different materials to different parts of one object, and then we'll move on from there. Alright class, thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed the video.